There's a moment in every rivalry where things get a little too personal, a little too close to home. And that's exactly what happened when Yannick Sinner was asked about Carlos Alcaraz splitting from Juan Carlos Ferrero. The Italian's response wasn't just diplomatic, it was revealing in ways I don't think even he intended. Because what Sinner said, and more importantly, what he didn't say, tells us everything about how he's viewing his biggest rival heading into the Australian Open. Let me set this up for you properly. We're in Melbourne. The Australian Open is about to start. Sinner's defending his title for the third time, trying to become only the second man in the Open era to win 3 straight Australian Opens after Djokovic. Alcaraz is going for the career Grand Slam, trying to become the youngest man ever to achieve that feat. The tension is already through the roof. And then someone asks Sinner about Alcaraz's coaching situation. The timing couldn't be more loaded. Here's what Sinner said, and I want you to really listen to this. These are questions that I can't and don't even want to answer. I also went through that. I understand the reasons, and everyone has their own reasons. Carlos knows and will know what's best for him. That's it. That's the entire statement. But let me tell you, there's so much packed into those few sentences that we need to unpack. First of all, let's talk about the phrase, I can't and don't even want to answer. That's not just diplomatic deflection. That's Sinner drawing a hard line. He's not saying no comment or I'd rather not discuss it. He's saying he fundamentally doesn't want to engage with this topic. And honestly, I respect that, because Sinner knows something that a lot of people commenting on the Alcaraz-Ferrero split seem to have forgotten. These coaching relationships are incredibly personal. They're almost like marriages in professional tennis. The coach isn't just teaching you technique. They're managing your psychology, your schedule, your entire career trajectory. And Sinner would know, because he went through his own coaching changes early in his career. Remember, Sinner worked with Riccardo Piatti for years before bringing in Simone Vagnozzi in February 2022. Then, Darren Cahill joined the team shortly after. That transition wasn't easy. There were questions about whether the change was the right move. There were doubts about whether Sinner could continue his upward trajectory with new voices in his box. And look what happened. 2 Australian Opens, Wimbledon, 4 Grand Slam titles, 65 consecutive weeks as world number 1 at one point during 2025. So when Sinner says, I also went through that, I understand the reasons. He's speaking from experience. He knows that from the outside, coaching changes can look dramatic or concerning. But from the inside, they're often necessary evolutions. The relationship between player and coach can wear down over time. The player's needs change as they mature. What worked when you were 15 years old might not work when you're 22, and you've won 6 Grand Slams. But here's what's really interesting to me. Sinner's refusal to comment isn't just about respecting Alcaraz's privacy, it's strategic. Think about it. Sinner and Alcaraz are in the middle of the greatest rivalry in men's tennis right now. They've won the last 8 Grand Slam titles between them. They contested the last 3 Grand Slam finals of 2025. Their head-to-head record is 10-6 in Alcaraz's favor, but Sinner won their most recent encounter at the ATP Finals in Turin. These guys know each other's games inside and out. And now, Alcaraz is showing up to the Australian Open without Juan Carlos Ferrero for the first time in his professional career. That's a massive variable. That's potentially a weakness that Sinner could exploit. Some players might start speculating publicly about how the change will affect Alcaraz's performance. They might try to get in his head a little bit. But Sinner? He's keeping his mouth shut. He's not giving Alcaraz any bulletin board material. He's not saying anything that could fire up his rival or give him extra motivation. Instead, Sinner's basically saying, Carlos is a grown man, he makes his own decisions, and I'm not going to second-guess them. That's incredibly mature for a 23-year-old, but it's also smart tennis psychology. By refusing to engage, Sinner's maintaining his focus on his own preparation while simultaneously showing respect for his rival. There's no drama, no controversy, no distraction, just 2 elite competitors preparing to face off at the highest level. Now, let's talk about what Sinner's statement tells us about how he views this situation from a competitive standpoint. Because make no mistake, Sinner is absolutely thinking about how this coaching change might affect their next match. He'd be crazy not to. The last time these two played, at the ATP Finals, Sinner won in straight sets. Before that, Alcaraz won 3 consecutive Grand Slam finals against him. The rivalry is that close, that competitive, that evenly matched. Alcaraz without Ferreror is an unknown quantity. Sure, Samuel Lopez has been part of the team before. He worked with Alcaraz at tournaments that Ferrero didn't attend in 2022 and 2023. He joined as an assistant coach in December 2024. But he's never been the sole head coach for Alcaraz at a Grand Slam. That's different. The pressure's different. The responsibility's different. The dynamic in the box is different. Some tennis commentators have suggested that this could be the opening Sinner needs to finally flip the head-to-head record in his favor. Rick Massey, Serena Williams' former coach, posted on social media that other players, maybe even Sinner, might see this as an opportunity. The theory is that without Ferrero's tactical guidance and emotional support, Alcaraz might be slightly more vulnerable, especially at the Australian Open, the one Grand Slam he's never won. But here's the thing, Sinner's not talking like someone who's looking for an easy advantage. When he says, Carlos knows and will know what's best for him, that sounds like genuine respect. That sounds like someone who understands that Alcaraz didn't make this decision lightly. That sounds like someone who's expecting Alcaraz to show up in Melbourne just as dangerous as ever, regardless of who's in his coaching box. And honestly, that's probably the smart read on the situation. Because if there's one thing we know about Carlos Alcaraz, it's that the kid thrives under pressure. He won his first Grand Slam at the US Open in 2022, when everyone was wondering if he could handle the weight of expectations. He won the French Open and Wimbledon back-to-back in 2024. He saved 3 championship points in the French Open final against Sinner in 2025 before winning in 5 sets. This is not a player who crumbles when things get difficult. The fact that Sinner went through his own coaching transitions gives him unique insight into what Alcaraz might be experiencing right now. When Vagnozzi and Cahill first joined Sinner's team, there was an adjustment period. New voices, new perspectives, new training methods. But Sinner worked through it. He trusted the process, and the results speak for themselves. So Sinner knows that coaching changes don't automatically mean declining performance. Sometimes they mean the opposite. What's also fascinating about Sinner's response is the timing of it. This press conference happened just days before the Australian Open starts. Sinner had just confirmed that Darren Cahill would be staying with his team for at least one more season. That was a big deal because Cahill had been planning to retire at the end of 2025, but Sinner convinced him to stay, partly because of a bet they made before the Wimbledon final. If Sinner won Wimbledon, which he did, Cahill had to agree to let Sinner decide whether he stayed, and Sinner chose to keep him. So Sinner's coming into this Australian Open with his coaching team intact, stable, unchanged. Meanwhile, Alcaraz is coming in with a brand new setup. That contrast is obvious to everyone, but Sinner's refusing to make a big deal out of it publicly. He's not claiming any advantage. He's not suggesting Alcaraz is at a disadvantage. He's just keeping his head down and focusing on his own preparation. That's the mark of a true champion, in my opinion. Sinner's not looking for psychological edges through trash talk or media gamesmanship. He's letting his tennis do the talking, and his tennis has been absolutely phenomenal. He won the Australian Open the last 2 years. He's 14-0 in Melbourne since losing to Stefanos Tsitsipas in the 4th round back in 2023. He's 32-0 against anyone not named Alcaraz in his last 5 Grand Slams. Those are absurd numbers, but Sinner also knows that Alcaraz has his number in the biggest moments, 6-4 in Grand Slam finals. That French Open final in June was one of the greatest matches in tennis history. Sinner had championship points. He was right there, and Alcaraz found a way to win. That has to be in Sinner's head somewhere, even if he'd never admit it publicly. I think that's part of why Sinner's being so careful with his words about the Ferrero situation. He doesn't want to give Alcaraz any extra motivation. He doesn't want this to become a storyline where Alcaraz feels like he has something to prove. Because Alcaraz with something to prove is terrifying. We've seen it over and over again. The bigger the challenge, the higher Alcaraz rises. Let's also talk about the context of this rivalry heading into the Australian Open. These two didn't just dominate the 2025 season. They completely monopolized the Grand Slam finals: French Open, Wimbledon, US Open. All three finals were Sinner versus Alcaraz. Alcaraz won in Paris and New York. Sinner won at Wimbledon. Before that, in 2024, they split the four majors. Sinner won the Australian Open and the US Open. Alcaraz won the French Open and Wimbledon. They're not just the two best players in the world right now. They're defining an entire era of men's tennis. Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic are gone or winding down their careers. The next generation is here, and it's these two leading the charge. Every match they play feels historic. Every Grand Slam they enter feels like it's going to come down to which one of them shows up in better form. And here's where the Ferrero situation gets really interesting from a competitive standpoint. Sinner has continuity with his coaching. He has stability. He has the same voices telling him the same things they've been telling him for 3 years. That's valuable. That's an advantage. But Alcaraz has fresh perspective. He has Samuel Lopez bringing potentially new ideas, new strategies, new approaches. That's valuable too. That could be an advantage in a different way. Sinner's smart enough to recognize that you can't just assume Alcaraz will be weaker without Ferrero. Maybe he'll be different. Maybe he'll be more unpredictable. Maybe Lopez will identify something in Sinner's game that Ferrero hadn't focused on. These are all possibilities, and that's why Sinner's not making any bold predictions or confident statements about how this will affect their rivalry. There's also the personal element here that I think people are overlooking. Sinner and Alcaraz are friends off the court. They genuinely like each other. They did an exhibition match in Seoul just before the Australian Open, and they were laughing together, playing table tennis, filming silly videos for social media. They have mutual respect. They understand what each other is going through because they're both dealing with the same pressures, the same expectations, the same scrutiny. So when Sinner says he understands the reasons behind coaching changes, he's not just talking tactically, he's talking emotionally. He gets that these relationships are complicated. He gets that sometimes things run their course. He gets that players need to make difficult decisions for their careers, and he's not going to pile on or make Alcaraz feel worse about an already difficult situation. That's actually pretty refreshing in modern sports, where so many athletes are looking for any edge they can find. Trash talk, mind games, subtle digs in press conferences. Sinner's not about that. He's old school in the best way. Respectful, focused, professional. He lets his racket do the talking. But make no mistake, when they meet on the court, there won't be any friendship or sympathy. Sinner wants to beat Alcaraz just as badly as Alcaraz wants to beat him. The difference is that Sinner's not going to use the Ferrero situation as ammunition. He's going to show up, play his game, and trust that his level is good enough to win. That's confidence. That's championship mentality. The Australian Open draw has them in opposite halves, which means they can't meet until the final. Sinner's in the same half as Novak Djokovic, who's won this tournament 10 times. That's a brutal draw for Sinner. If both players win through to the semifinals, they'd face each other there. Djokovic beat Alcaraz at the Australian Open last year in the quarterfinals, so he's proven he can still compete with the young guys at this tournament. Sinner would have to get through that potential gauntlet just to reach the final. Alcaraz, on the other hand, is in the same half as Alexander Zverev, the number 3 seed and last year's runner-up. Zverev's been knocking on the door of his first Grand Slam for years. He reached the final here last year and lost to Sinner. He's desperate to break through. If Alcaraz and Zverev both advance, they could meet in the semifinals. That would be Alcaraz's first big test without Ferreror in his box. But honestly, both of these guys are so good that you have to expect them to reach the final. Sinner's won 14 straight matches at the Australian Open. Alcaraz is the world number one and has been playing incredible tennis. Unless something unexpected happens, we're looking at another Sinner versus Alcaraz final, which would be their fourth straight Grand Slam final, which would be absolutely bonkers. And if that happens, we'll see exactly how the Ferrero situation affects Alcaraz. We'll see if Samuel Lopez can provide the same level of tactical insight and emotional support. We'll see if Alcaraz looks different, plays different, handles the pressure differently. Sinner will have all the information he needs by that point. He'll have watched Alcaraz's matches. He'll have studied the tape. He'll have prepared accordingly. But right now, before the tournament starts, Sinner's keeping his cards close to his chest. He's not speculating. He's not analyzing. He's not commenting. Because he understands that anything he says becomes part of the narrative. And the narrative he wants is simple. Two great players competing at the highest level. No drama, no controversy, no distractions. Just tennis. There's also something to be said about how Sinner's handling of this reflects his maturity as a competitor. 3 years ago, Sinner was still trying to establish himself as a legitimate Grand Slam contender. Now he's a 4-time major champion and a former world number one. He's been through the wars. He's experienced the highs and the lows. He knows that tennis careers are long and complicated, and that coaching relationships are just one piece of the puzzle. When Sinner says, everyone has their own reasons, he's acknowledging that what works for him might not work for Alcaraz. His partnership with Vanozzi and Cahill has been phenomenal, but that doesn't mean Alcaraz's decision to part with Ferrero was wrong. Different players need different things at different stages of their careers. Sinner gets that. He's lived it. I also think there's an element of self-preservation in Sinner's response. By refusing to engage with the Ferrero topic, he's protecting himself from any potential backlash. If he had said something like, "I think this could affect Carlos negatively," and then Alcaraz wins the Australian Open, Sinner looks foolish. If he had said, "I think this is a good move for Carlos," and then Alcaraz struggles, it looks patronizing. By saying nothing of substance, Sinner avoids all those potential pitfalls. It's the same strategy he's used throughout his career. Stay focused on yourself. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Trust your process. Trust your team. Do the work. Let the results speak for themselves. That approach has worked pretty well for Sinner so far. 4 Grand Slams by age 23. Multiple weeks at world number one. The respect of his peers and the tennis community. He's doing something right. And part of what he's doing right is managing relationships. Not just with his coaches, but with his rivals, with the media, with the fans. Sinner understands that professional tennis is a small world. The players see each other all the time. They practice together, they travel together, they compete against each other for years and years. Building and maintaining good relationships matters, not just for your reputation, but for your mental health and your career longevity. By showing respect to Alcaraz during this difficult transition, Sinner's reinforcing the mutual respect that defines their rivalry. That's valuable. That's important, because these two are going to be playing each other for the next 10 or 15 years. Probably. This is just the beginning of their story, and starting that story with respect and professionalism sets the right tone for everything that comes after. The broader tennis world has been fascinated by the Alcaraz-Ferrero split because it seemed to come out of nowhere. One of the most successful partnerships in recent tennis history ended abruptly right after Alcaraz's best season. 8 titles, including 2 Grand Slams. Year-end number 1. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but clearly something was happening behind the scenes that we didn't see. The reports that emerged after the split painted a picture of contractual disagreements, communication breakdowns, and differing visions for the future. Ferrero said he would have liked to continue. Alcaraz said it was a mutual decision. Those are two different narratives. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And Sinner, wisely, is staying out of it. Because here's the thing. Sinner doesn't know what really happened between Alcaraz and Ferreror. Nobody does except the people directly involved. And even they probably have different perspectives on it. So for Sinner to start speculating or offering opinions would be inappropriate. It would be overstepping. It would be inserting himself into a situation that has nothing to do with him. That's why his statement is so perfect. I can't and don't even want to answer. He's drawing a boundary. He's saying this is personal, this is private, this is none of my business. And in doing so, he's showing more class than a lot of the tennis commentators and analysts who have been dissecting this split for weeks. What I keep coming back to is that final line. Carlos knows and will know what's best for him. That's not just diplomatic. That's genuine belief in his rival's judgment. Sinner's saying that he trusts Alcaraz to make good decisions for his own career, even if those decisions seem surprising or controversial from the outside, even if they create uncertainty or instability in the short term. And maybe that's the real story here, not what Sinner thinks about the Ferreror situation, but what his response tells us about the kind of competitor he is. Respectful, but ruthless. Friendly, but focused. Mature beyond his years. He's not looking for cheap advantages or easy wins. He wants to beat Alcaraz at his best, with his best coach, playing his best tennis, because that's the only victory that really matters. As we head into the Australian Open, all eyes will be on how Alcaraz performs without Ferreror. Will he look lost without his longtime mentor? Will Samuel Lopez be able to fill the void? Will the change disrupt his rhythm or free him to play more instinctively? These are all questions we'll get answers to over the next 2 weeks. But for Sinner, none of that changes his approach. He's going to prepare the same way he always does. He's going to trust his team. He's going to play his game. And if he faces Alcaraz in the final, he's going to compete like hell. The coaching situation doesn't matter. The narratives don't matter. All that matters is who plays better tennis on the day. That's the mindset of a champion. And that's why Sinner's response to the Ferreror question, as brief and non-committal as it was, tells us everything we need to know about where his head is at. He's locked in, he's focused, he's ready. And he's not going to let anything distract him from the goal of winning his 3rd straight Australian Open title. Whether Alcaraz can stop him, with or without Ferreror, is the question that will define this tournament. But Sinner's not worrying about that right now. He's just putting in the work, trusting the process, and staying in his lane. It's worked for him so far, and if his refusal to engage with the Ferreror drama is any indication, it's going to keep working for him in Melbourne. So while everyone else is speculating and analyzing and theorizing about what the coaching change means for Alcaraz, Sinner's doing what he does best, keeping quiet, staying professional, and preparing to compete at the highest level. That's the kind of focus and discipline that wins Grand Slams, and if Sinner wins this one, making it 3 in a row at the Australian Open, we'll look back at this moment and recognize it for what it really was. A masterclass in how to handle a loaded question, maintain your composure, and keep your eyes on the prize.